Hello and welcome to Mom Gets It Done. In this video I'm going to walk you through how to make crib bumpers for your crib. Before we get started, I want to address the concerns about crib bumpers. No, they are not recommended anymore for infants or young babies who cannot roll well yet. When my daughter was about 9 months old, I started really seeing the need for them because she would get her feet stuck in the slats of her crib, her pacifiers would fall through, and mostly because she would bump her head against the sides of her crib while she was sleeping, and it would wake her up. I talked to our pediatrician, and he was comfortable with us using bumpers at that point because my daughter was mobile enough. So then I started planning on how to make them. So the first thing you need to do is choose your fabric. I used a pattern for the outside of each panel and a solid for the inside. I also wanted to use piping along the top to add detail. You could use piping on all sides, but just to save money and time, I just did it across the tops since you don't really see the other sides anyways. I also rounded the corners of each panel. Supplies you'll need. First, you need 6 yards of fabric total, 3 yards of print and 3 yards of solid. You'll also need 15 feet of rope or cord for the piping. I bought this at Home Depot and just had them cut 15 feet for me. It was less expensive than buying it at a craft or fabric store. You'll also need the stuffing or foam panels for inserts. I went the easy way and bought pre-cut panels. I bought these at Joann's with a coupon on my phone for 40% off. It's called New Foam and comes with 6 pieces that are 10 by 26 inches each. You will have 1 on each end of your crib and 2 across the front and the back. These come fitting most standard size cribs, but you'll want to measure yours so that to make sure that you don't need to trim the length. If you do need to trim them, then just adjust the size of the panel fabric to match. You'll also need a corner template if you want to round the corners. I just cut this from a square piece of paper. You'll also need just your sewing basics, thread, pins, scissors, and of course your sewing machine. And last, you'll need a zipper foot. In this photo, the regular foot is on the left and the zipper foot is attached to the machine. This was the one thing that I did not have before this project, but it was very easy to use and I'll show you how. We'll use it on the piping and it allows you to sew right up next to the edge of the cord and make a tight wrap with your fabric. So here is your cut list. For the 6 panels, you'll need 6 pieces of the front fabric that are 11 by 27 inches and 6 pieces of the back fabric, the same 11 by 27 inches. Since I wanted rounded corners, I cut a template from a square piece of paper and used it to cut all the panels and the foam inserts. Each panel will have 4 ties. Since I wanted to carry over the same look as I had on the panels, with the front being a pattern and the back being a solid red, I needed to cut 24 strips of each fabric. Each strip for the ties was 12 inches by 2 inches. That 12 inches is long enough to tie together, but if you want to tie it in a bow, you should make it 18 inches long instead of 12 inches long. Then for the piping, which I just did in red, you'll need 6 pieces of fabric that are 30 inches by 2 inches. The 2-inch width was enough to wrap around the rope that I used for the piping, but depending on the diameter of rope that you use, you might need a wider strip of fabric. So just to review your cut list, for your panels, you'll need 6 pieces of each fabric, 11 by 27. For the ties, you'll have 24 total, so 24 pieces of each fabric, 12 by 2 or 18 by 2, depending on if you want bows or regular ties. And then for the piping, 6 strips of the accent color, 2 inches wide by 30 inches long. The first thing that you sew are all of the ties. These are very simple to sew, but honestly, they are a pain to turn inside out. So lay your front and back piece of fabric together with the good size facing each other, pin it a few places, and then sew all but one end. To make the hard corners, you'll want to just stop your machine, lift the foot and turn the fabric, and then start sewing again. Snip the corners off and be careful not to cut your seam. Snipping the corners off will make it easier when you flip it inside out to have a sharper corner. Then turn them all inside out and iron them flat. Now, as I said, this is the most time-consuming part of this entire project because there are so many. You will have 24 ties total. I recommend that you do all the sewing first and then just put on a good movie and turn them all inside out. And you'll want to iron them also when you're done before you move on to this next part. So the next thing you do after the ties is sew your piping. You'll need to switch out the regular foot for the zipper foot if you want to get that tight seam along the edge of the rope. In this photo, I'm holding the regular foot and the zipper foot is on the machine. So cut your rope into 30-inch pieces. I used a lighter to singe the ends so that the ends of the rope wouldn't fray. Then wrap your 30-inch strip of fabric around the quarter rope. You'll want to pin it several places and then you sew it tight along the edge using the zipper foot. Now you're ready to assemble your panels. So lay a printed panel, which is the fabric that you want showing on the outside of your crib, with the good side up, and position 4 ties on top like this. The open edges of the ties should be at the outside of the panel so that they end up getting sewn in the seam. And the printed or the good side of the ties should face the good side of the panel fabric. So here they're facing down and the back is facing up. Pin the ties in place so that they don't move while you're sewing around the outside of the panel. Now lay a strip of piping along the top of the panel with its seam facing outward. Where it wraps around the corners, you'll need to cut slits in the piping so that it goes around the curve. Now lay your solid panel, or the one that you want facing the inside of your crib, on top with the good side facing down. And finally pin it all around the edges. The tricky part is pinning the 2 panels together with the piping in between. Since the piping isn't going all the way around, you'll need to allow the ends of the piping to drift out and your seam that you sew around the edge of the panel will cross over those ends of the piping. Now you're ready to sew all the panels together. I used the zipper foot again so that the seam was up close to the piping. I started just above that top left tie and sewed all along the top with going across the piping first, and then back around and stopped just before that bottom left tie, leaving that left side open so that you can flip it inside out. When you hit the end of the piping, you might need to stop your machine and reposition and start over on the other side of the piping, where I mentioned before that the edge of the piping drifts out through your seam. My sewing machine couldn't sew over the cord without causing an issue, so I just went back later and stitched tightly around the end of the piping by hand. After sewing the 3 sides, I also ran a quick stitch to sew those left side ties to one of the panels, but without actually sewing the panels together. This just made the closing up process easier if the ties were already attached to the panel. Now you're going to flip the panel inside out. Be careful of the pins that you left in there with the ties, and stuff the panel with the foam insert. Then you're going to sew the final edge together either by hand or, if you want, by machine. I sewed mine by hand using a hidden stitch. Now you just repeat that 5 more times and you're done. I hope you have found this helpful and easy to follow. Please subscribe to Mom Gets It Done for more videos. Thank you.